If I told you something as innocent as dental floss has fueled multiple successful prison breaks, you'd probably think I'd lost my mind. But it's completely true. You see, with limited access to pretty much everything you and I take for granted, prison inmates get insanely inventive with what they can get their hands on. For this reason, a ton of seemingly innocent items are totally banned from prisons. From the exposed dangers of Jolly Ranchers to the real reasons several prisons banned Dungeons and Dragons. Climb into your orange overalls as we uncover why prisons ban some extremely surprising everyday items. Flossing your way to freedom. Now, it goes without saying that regardless of a prisoner's crime, they should be at least afforded basic human rights, such as food, clothing, and hygiene essentials. That being said, did you know that dental floss specifically is actually banned from many prisons? And no, it's not because the prisons want to punish inmates with bad teeth and gingivitis. No, the real reason is way crazier. Allow me to explain. In 2012, a group of prisoners in White Plains, New York, banded together to demand their constitutional right to floss, threatening to sue the prison if they refused to supply the dental product. I mean, who knew prisoners were so passionate about oral hygiene? But the reality of the request, according to the prison staff, was much less squeaky clean than it seemed. In fact, prison officials initially flat out refused the request, expressing concerns about security issues, what with dental floss having a surprising history of being closely entangled with jailbreak. Back in the year 2000, Texas prisoner Antonio Lara used floss coated with toothpaste as an abrasive in order to cut his way out of his prison cell. Given that for prisoners, the one thing they have is time, such a seemingly insurmountable task is made possible, making painfully gradual progress over weeks and months. Lara eventually managed to cut some of the lower bars off of his cell door and used his newfound freedom to carry out some, let's say, unfortunate deeds on a fellow inmate. So clearly, he wasn't using his powers for good. Given this truly unexpected scenario, utilizing dental floss and toothpaste, of all things, it demonstrates how incredibly resourceful prisoners can be, and you can begin to see why prison officials are hesitant to allow floss on the inside. But it's not just that one tale that supports the argument. In 2012, convicted robbers Joseph Banks and Kenneth Conley conducted an unbelievable escape from Chicago's Metropolitan Correctional Center. The pair fabricated a rope made from woven and knotted bed sheets and floss and shimmied out to freedom through a carefully prepared gap below the window of their 17th story cell. After successfully abseiling down the building, the two hailed a cab and made their escape. However, it wasn't long until the fugitives were caught. Joseph was found merely 2 days later hiding in an apartment a few doors down from his childhood home. Remaining on the run for a slightly more impressive 18 days, Kenneth was found in the basement boiler room of an apartment complex, disguised as an old man. Even so, knowing the escapes were made possible with the help of certain innocuous-seeming items, it's easy to see why prisons may have trust issues when it comes to floss. Despite this, however, not to mention the fact that a plastic floss container can also be potentially weaponized, the New York prisoners mentioned earlier were eventually granted their right to floss, albeit only with Kaiser's floss loops, which are circles of rubbery floss which are designed to break easily and contain no hard plastic. But while we're on the topic of preventing jailbreaks, did you know that there's actually a good reason for why many prisons in the US issue their inmates with bright orange jumpsuits? It's simple, really. It's so that escaping inmates are easily identifiable and can be reported to the police. Although it would seem, judging by the earlier story of Joseph Banks and Kenneth Connolly's great escape, certain Chicago cab drivers may turn a blind eye to the blinding orange. Meanwhile, over in the UK, if inmates are particularly well behaved, they may be permitted to wear their own clothing on the inside, though there's a strict ban on black or white clothing, as this may be mistaken for the black and white uniform worn by prison guards, which could make an escape possible. So, I'm sorry prisoners, but it looks like your sentence is going to include adding a splash of color to your wardrobe, whether you like it or not. Forbidden knowledge. It's safe to assume that while serving time in prison, inmates have a lot of time on their hands. And while many turn to books as a source of entertainment, a prisoner's choice of books can actually be somewhat limited, with many surprising titles being banned. Turns out it's a pretty common practice for prisons to ban books deemed too violent, sexually explicit, or even containing content that might encourage the breaking of prison rules. One such book that has been vetoed by many prisons, such as Utah State, is Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power, a book which provides advice on how to seduce, charm, and deceive opponents, allowing skillful manipulation. But in an institution where subordination is the name of the game, it's easy to see why prisons would rather their inmates not get a hold of this type of literature. Likewise, any books that might teach inmates potentially dangerous skills, such as electrical wiring, are also commonly off limits, as you can see here on the list of banned books from the Michigan Department of Corrections. That ban list also threw in such classic titles as Sun Tzu's Art of War, You Are Going to Prison, The Practical Guide by Jim Hogshire, Raymond Buckland's Complete Book of Witchcraft, Classic Trains Magazine, ESPN's NBA Draft Preview Magazine, The Truck Driver's Guidebook, and the utterly despicable book, almost too scary to mention, Web Design Demystified by Wendy Willard. Oh. As you can see, the reasoning behind these bans is sometimes self-evident and sometimes more than a little baffling. Bizarrely, the list even includes several Dungeons & Dragons handbooks, but we'll get more into that a little later. Perhaps one of the most unexpected books that is banned from prisons over in Texas, though, is a Charlie Brown Christmas pop-up edition. Now, it goes without saying that it certainly isn't for any lewd content. Instead, it's actually due to its pop-up cardboard flaps, which allow for easy smuggling of contraband items. If you thought that was extreme, prisons across Missouri ended up banning prisoners from receiving books from the outside world altogether in 2023, due to there being too many smuggling attempts nestled among gifted pages. Yep. All because some delinquents couldn't help themselves from smuggling. Now Big Bruce and Cell 201 won't get to find out what happens at the end of Pride and Prejudice. For shame. In possibly the most bizarre book bannings, though, in 2022, the Michigan Department of Corrections specifically banned Spanish and Swahili dictionaries. When explaining why, the prison claimed these books are, quote, a threat to the state's penitentiaries. They went on to elaborate that, quote, if certain prisoners all decided to learn a very obscure language, they'd be able to then speak freely in front of staff and others about introducing contraband or insulting staff or assaulting another prisoner, which, granted, makes sense, but why only Spanish and Swahili? And if the prison is talking about quote-unquote very obscure languages, it seems odd to include Spanish, considering it is the second most spoken language in the US. So they may have banned Spanish and Swahili, but at least prisoners still have Simlish as an option. Sul Sul. Speaking of which, why not say hola, habari, or even Sul Sul to me down below in the comments. And while you're at it, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. Perfect. Now let's head back behind bars and discover some more bizarrely banned items. Deadly sweet. From rotting your teeth to increasing your waist size, we all know the dangers of candy. However, did you know that candy can be particularly dangerous inside prison? And not just any candy, but specifically Jolly Ranchers. Want to know more? Hard candies, including Jolly Ranchers, are considered dangerous enough to be banned in some prisons, like those under the administration of the Minnesota Department of Corrections. Why, you wonder? Well, first of all, according to the New York Daily News, some crafty prisoners have actually been known to melt hard candy down into a liquid and then mold it into a sharp weapon, letting it harden as it cools. The cylindrical shape of Jolly Ranchers in particular makes for an easily assembled shaft and pointed tip that only requires melting the ends of each piece, rapidly providing sturdy gripping surface for the hand. That being said, fully melting the candy and reshaping it into a mold is much sturdier, whether that entails molding it into a big, heavy block to drop on enemies, Looney Tunes style, or your more classic, sharp, pointy shape. Needless to say, candy shanks can then be used to get up to all kinds of mischief, though obviously candy weaponry isn't the most hard-wearing. But it's not just weaponry weaponry, but when melted down, the candy can even be mixed with a cocktail of different crushed-up medications in order to create an edible intoxicant. So candy shank-wielding prisoners that are also intoxicated? What could possibly go wrong? In addition to Jolly Ranchers, chewing gum is also off-limits in some prisons. Apart from being the source of unsightly messes, you may never have considered gum could, in theory, be used to escape. It sounds unlikely, but a reported concern is that particularly cunning prisoners might be able to use large quantities of gum to create molded impressions of the guards' keys, should they manage to get their hands on them. Now, I'm not exactly sure what the prisoners could possibly use to fill the impression, as melting and casting metal isn't exactly easy in jail, unless welding classes are offered, that is. That said, if we've learned anything so far, it's that prisoners can come up with a way to do just about anything. So better to be safe than sorry, right? On top of all that, some prisoners might even use chewing gum to block the locks on their cell doors to prevent guards entering during a planned attack or similar bad behavior. In fact, it's for this very same reason that one prison over in the UK had to stop serving oatmeal, what with inmates using it to block up their keyholes. Who'd have ever thought that oatmeal, of all things, could pose a security threat? I'm almost impressed. Under the influence. Being at the top of the food chain, it's fair to say that we humans are pretty clever creatures. This is in part thanks to our resourcefulness and ability to adapt, and as such, we will pretty much always find a way to get our mitts on some booze. Back in 2009, a bunch of UK prisoners were so parched for a drink that they went to extreme measures. It was during a swine flu outbreak, and the prison had taken precautions by implementing hand sanitizing stations throughout the prison. But with the sanitizer containing high amounts of ethanol, aka straight alcohol, the booze-starved prisoners decided to mix it with soda, resulting in a hand sanitizer cocktail. Needless to say that this is not only gross, but extremely dangerous, what with many hand sanitizers also containing methanol, which can destroy brain cells and nerves, cause blindness, and even death. Sadly, if unsurprisingly, this prison's hand sanitizer binge was actually suspected to have caused one inmate's demise, forcing the prison to remove all hand sanitizers. Crazy how consuming something not designed for human consumption could be problematic. Did someone say Darwin Awards? For a similar reason, sugar has been known to be banned in some prisons, including a handful in Australia and the UK, as it can be used to make alcohol. Commonly known as prison hooch or pruno, this is essentially a mixture of sugar water and any available source of yeast, such as fruit, including the skin. Fruit juices are also a common choice given that they're common in prisons. The concoction is then left to ferment in a relatively warm, hard-to-find place, such as a toilet tank, for about 5 to 7 days, resulting in an alcoholic beverage. And having fortunately never tried the stuff, I can't comment on how it tastes, though some have described its flavor as a vomit-flavored wine cooler. Delicious. For a fantastic video demonstrating a full recreation and taste testing of prison booze, be sure to check out Larry Lawton's YouTube channel after you finish this video. Dark magic. There are many things you'd expect to be banned from prisons: alcohol, technology, weapons, etc. However, possibly the last thing you'd ever expect a prison to have specifically banned is magic. Okay, before you start thinking prisons are discriminating against wizards, allow me to explain. In 2023, the Deputy Director of the New Mexico Corrections Department, Timothy Hatch, decided to ban Magic the Gathering for all prisons in New Mexico. In case you don't know, Magic the Gathering is a trading card game, which features fantasy elements, like casting spells and summoning creatures. Of course, these prisoners weren't actually summoning goblins to do their bidding, which left some thinking the decision was made purely out of spite to deprive the inmates of fun. However, the department stated that the decision was made due to inmates of at least one prison in the state using the cards as an alternative form of currency, which is a practice they want to stamp out. Wait till they hear about Dogecoin. In a similar sweep of anti-fantasy action, the Waupun Correctional Institution of Wisconsin banned its inmates from playing Dungeons & Dragons. When explaining why, the prison claimed that it was concerned the game might encourage fantasies of escaping. I mean, hate to break it to them, but I'm pretty sure most prisoners are already fantasizing about escaping. Other reasons listed included the allegation that D&D encourages competitive hostility, violence, possible gambling, as well as potential tension that might arise from one person being allocated the elevated role of leader or dungeon master of the game. Pretty crazy, right? With this ban being widespread across prisons in multiple US states, it seems like someone in the administration must really hate nerds. But as we've seen already, for prisoners, where there's a will, there's a way. And it would be no surprise to learn that a whole network of secret tabletop role-playing is taking place right now in prison broom closets and shady jail yard corners everywhere across the states. Consequential communications. It's true that love knows no bounds, not even the bounds of prison walls. And while many relationships, temporary or otherwise, form on the inside, it can be extremely challenging to maintain a pre-existing relationship with one person locked up and the other still enjoying free life on the outside. So, when convicts leave behind lovers in the civilian world, it's not uncommon for them to send and receive love letters to keep the spark alive. However, when it comes to those letters, there's actually a quite surprising rule enforced by guards. Besides the obvious policy that inmates aren't permitted to receive, shall we say, physically stimulating photography, if you catch my drift, the Fairfax County Detention Center in Virginia specifically banned lipstick-stained letters. Why, you're probably wondering? Well, it actually makes a lot of sense. According to the Marshall Project, a non-profit criminal justice publication, a smear of makeup can be easily laced with crushed-down psychoactive compounds, which can then be used or sold by the receiving inmate. So, in order to prevent this, per the Virginia prison's policy, any lipstick-stained letter will be sent back from whence it came. It's for the same reason that Utah State Prison even banned its inmates from receiving crayon and marker pen drawings. You might assume these doodles to be the work of an innocent child, but that's exactly what the people using them to smuggle contraband into prisons would want you to think. The truth is that controlled substances can be easily crushed down into a thin paste and laced into the drawings. Or worse yet, even the paper itself might be soaked in liquefied narcotics, which inmates can then use. Across the pond in the UK, prisons have similarly banned, quote, Christmas cards with glitter and sticky stuff on. And this isn't out of a warden's personal disdain for glitter, but rather to combat a spike in illicit substance usage affecting British prisons. The concern is that these compounds may be sprayed onto the card, ready for consumption. Despite this, the prisons didn't go full Grinch mode and completely ruin the spirit of Christmas. What with them so generously allowing inmates to receive photocopied versions of their Christmas cards? Nothing captures the loving warmth of the holidays quite like a grayscale photocopied card. Hopefully at least the printed copy was still warm. Warm copy paper. Creatively dangerous. It's hardly surprising that many prisoners are of the, well, let's just say, aggressive disposition. So naturally, they may have a tendency to want to use weapons while on the inside. And as you'll see soon, where there's a will, there's a weapon. As it seems some prisoners can make a weapon out of just about anything. Case in point, numerous prisons in different US states prohibit spiral-bound notebooks. Due to the metal spiral being easily removed, inmates can then use it for a whole host of mischief, such as unraveling it to create weapons or even potentially fashioning lock-picking tools to try and escape their cells. Regardless, it goes without saying that a sharp piece of metal can do some damage when in the wrong hands. Speaking of sharp items, one prison in Scotland even had to confiscate ceramic mugs from its inmates due to them smashing them and using them as weapons. Presumably, the inmates are now reliant on sippy cups exclusively for their morning joe. Besides mugs, one of the most common prison weapons is what's often referred to as sock and lock, aka a sock filled with padlocks or anything else available that's small and weighty. It essentially forms a DIY flail that can do serious damage, and there are countless incidents on record. In fact, in the UK's notorious Cookham Wood prison, inmates made such a habit of filling their socks with heavy objects such as batteries, pool balls, and even cans of tuna that the prison decided to actually ban full-length socks in 2015. But don't worry, there wasn't just a bunch of barefooted prisoners trotting around. The prison replaced their standard socks with ankle socks, which don't have enough length to be swung around as a flail. And while the sock ban certainly helped, one of the prison's insiders insisted that regardless, inmates will always find a way to hurt one another. And if you think that's an exaggeration, a former inmate of New York City's Rikers Island prison explained on a Quora thread that while he was serving time, even the tiny plastic battery covers on remote controls were banned. Reason being, some other prisoners apparently had a habit of shaving them down and using them as weapons. Jeez. These prisoners really don't leave any stone unturned. Likewise, another unexpected item that some prisons have banned for quite disturbing reason is baby oil. Intended to soothe and moisturize skin, prisoners have been known to use it for quite literally the opposite effect. According to ex-inmate and now TikToker SC Convict, the oil would be heated in the microwave to extreme temperatures, and I'm pretty sure you can figure out the rest. So yeah, if you find yourself in the slammer, don't trust the safety of any everyday object, because someone's gonna find a way to hurt you with it. Felonious fan clubs. Don't you just love love? Some might even argue that despite a person's crimes, everyone deserves love. But try telling that to the prisons that have actually put a ban on love. How so? Well, over in Denmark, the Danish government has introduced a new bill that specifically prohibits prisoners who are serving lifetime sentences from entering into a new romantic relationship. To some, it might seem like an unnecessary and perhaps even harsh policy to introduce, but there is actually a pretty reasonable justification for it. Having noticed a rising number of, quote, groupies of criminals, those being young women and men who are allegedly fascinated by certain criminals and obsessively engage in communication with them, basically totally fangirling over them, the government hopes that this bill will reduce the prevalence of this behavior. Needless to say, getting pally with prisoners who've been condemned for some of the worst crimes known to man doesn't always go swimmingly for both parties, and encouraging celebrity-like worship of society's most depraved is not exactly something governments nor prison officials want taking place. So, with that in mind, perhaps the Danish ban on love isn't so harsh after all. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts on this, so let me know down in the comments. No time for tea. There are many things commonly associated with the British: the royal family, extreme insincere politeness, a love for queuing, and perhaps most important of all, cups of tea. And if you ever doubted for a second just how seriously Brits take their tea, well then just keep watching. Back in 2018, a British prison, Cookham Wood Youth Jail, came under fire after an independent prisoner welfare monitoring board discovered that it was depriving inmates of cups of tea. Gosh! How positively barbaric! The prison defended itself by claiming the ban was only a punishment for bad behavior, though the independent board ruled it as, quote, inappropriate nonetheless. I mean, you can lock the British up, strip them of all their possessions, family, and friends, but by God, you can go to hell before you take away their cups of tea. Jolly good show. Now, where'd I leave my crumpets? Bake Off is about to start. Alright, that brings our stint behind bars to an end. Enjoy your freedom, and let me know down in the comments which contraband item shocked you the most. And as always, thanks for watching.